We're living in a time when simply existing feels like too much. When we're connected to everyone and isolated from everyone at the same time. When we scroll through images of perfect lives while drowning inside, forgetting that behind every bright screen someone else is also struggling, also pretending, also wondering if they're the only one who can't get it together. The chaos you're feeling isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's what happens when a human nervous system, designed for small tribes and slow seasons, suddenly finds itself in a world that never stops demanding, never stops moving, never stops asking for more. The Buddha began his teachings with a simple observation: suffering exists. Not as punishment, not as failure, but as a fundamental part of being human. And he offered this not as bad news, but as relief. Because when you understand that darkness touches everyone, the question stops being, "Why is this happening to me?" and becomes, "How do I meet what is?" In the next 3 hours, you're going to discover the ancient path that transforms how you experience chaos, not by fighting it, but by understanding something essential about its nature. These aren't abstract philosophies. They're gentle practices that reveal the unshakable peace that exists beneath every storm. So find a place to rest. Let your body settle. If you'd like, share where you're listening from. There's quiet comfort in knowing we're seeking peace together. Let's begin. There's something we need to talk about. Something that touches every person who's ever felt that empty ache inside. That feeling that no matter what you do, no matter what you achieve or acquire or experience, it's never quite enough. There's always something missing, always one more thing you need before you can finally rest. This isn't a personal failing. This is the second noble truth the Buddha taught. That craving, this endless wanting, is what transforms ordinary pain into deep suffering. But let's be honest about what this looks like in real life, because ancient teachings don't always capture the specific ways this pattern plays out in our modern world. You wake up feeling heavy, so you reach for your phone. The scrolling doesn't actually help, but it fills the space where discomfort was starting to bloom. You get to work, and the day feels overwhelming, so you plan a vacation, something to look forward to, something that will finally bring the relief you're seeking. The vacation comes and goes, beautiful but somehow not quite what you hoped. And within days of returning, that same emptiness is back. So you think maybe it's about fitness. You join a gym, buy new workout clothes, commit to becoming the person who has their life together. For a while, the novelty fills the gap, but then the routine becomes just routine, and the emptiness underneath remains untouched. Maybe it's about learning something new. You take a course, read books, consume podcast after podcast about self-improvement and personal growth. You collect information like some people collect stamps, hoping that somewhere in all that accumulated knowledge, you'll find the missing piece that makes everything click into place. Or perhaps it's about relationships. You think if you could just find the right person, the right circle of friends, the right community, then you'd finally feel complete. And when relationships disappoint, because all relationships eventually involve disappointment, you either double down trying to fix them or move on to seek better ones. The pattern is always the same. Something feels lacking inside, so you look outside for something to fill it. And here's the devastating truth: it works. Temporarily, it actually works. That new experience does bring excitement. That purchase does create a moment of satisfaction. That relationship does ease the loneliness, at least at first. The problem isn't that these things fail to help at all. The problem is that they never help enough, never help for long enough, never touch the actual source of the emptiness. So you consume more experiences, more possessions, more knowledge, more connections, more entertainment, more distraction, more anything that might finally be the thing that works. And the world we live in has become brilliantly, terrifyingly efficient at feeding this pattern. There's an app for every craving, a product for every inadequacy, a solution for every problem, all just a click away, all promising to fill the hole you're feeling. You can order anything and have it arrive tomorrow. You can connect with anyone across the globe instantly. You can access infinite entertainment, infinite information, infinite possibility. And yet, have you noticed, the more available everything becomes, the less satisfied we seem to be. This is what the Buddha saw 2,500 years ago, before smartphones and same-day delivery, before the internet made the entire world's offerings accessible from your bed. He saw that the human mind, left to its own devices, creates an endless cycle of desire and temporary satisfaction and renewed desire. He called it tanha, craving, thirst, the grasping quality of mind that always wants what it doesn't have. And he taught something radical. He said the way out isn't through better consuming or smarter seeking or finally finding the right thing to fill you up. The way out is through understanding that you were never empty in the first place. Think about that for a moment. Really let it land. What if the emptiness you've been trying to fill isn't actually emptiness? What if it's just space, natural, necessary space, that you've been taught to fear and avoid? In the teaching traditions that understand this deeply, they use the metaphor of a cup. If you come to a teacher with a cup already full of your assumptions, your certainty about how things are, your collection of half-understood concepts and borrowed beliefs, there's nowhere for new understanding to go. The teacher's job isn't to pour more into your full cup. The teacher's job is to help you pour it out. This is why the approach in authentic Buddhist training, feels so different from most modern education. Modern education is about accumulation, gather more information, develop more skills, add more credentials to your resume. The assumption is that you're insufficient as you are, and the solution is to become more. Buddhist training works in reverse. It operates on the understanding that you're already complete, already whole, already equipped with everything you need. The problem is that you can't see this because of everything you've piled on top of your natural state. All the beliefs about who you're supposed to be, all the stories about what you need to be happy, all the concepts about how life should work and what it means when it doesn't work that way, all the accumulated weight of other people's opinions, society's expectations, your own judgments about your adequacy. The practice is about letting all of that fall away. Not because those things are inherently wrong or bad, but because they're covering up something more essential. They're like dust on a mirror. The mirror doesn't need the dust cleaned off to become reflective. It was always reflective. The dust just obscured what was already there. Now here's where this teaching becomes uncomfortable, and it's important to be honest about this. Letting go is not a pleasant process at first, because the things you're carrying, even when they're heavy, even when they're not serving you, have become familiar. They're part of how you know yourself. That story about why you struggle, you've been telling it so long it feels like truth. That belief about what you need to be worthy, you built your entire life around it. When someone suggests you don't need these things, when a teaching points to the possibility of just letting them drop, your first response is usually fear. Because if you're not that story, who are you? If you don't need what you thought you needed, what happens to all the years you spent seeking it? This is the discomfort that makes people turn away from genuine practice. Not because the practice is too difficult, but because it asks you to question the very foundations you've built your identity upon. But here's what happens if you stay with it. If you're willing to sit in that discomfort, rather than immediately filling it with something new, you start to notice something extraordinary. The space that appears when you let something go, that space you were so afraid of, isn't empty in a terrible way. It's empty in the way the sky is empty, open, spacious, full of possibility. You realize you can breathe more deeply, think more clearly, respond to life more freely because you're not constantly defending the accumulated weight of who you think you should be. This is what non-attachment actually means, and it's one of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. People hear non-attachment and think it means not caring, not loving anything or anyone, maintaining cold distance from life, so nothing can hurt you. But that's not it at all. Non-attachment means loving completely while holding lightly. It means enjoying experiences without clinging to them when they pass. Appreciating what you have without convincing yourself you can't be happy without it. Caring deeply about people while understanding that you can't control whether they stay or go. It means recognizing that everything in life is temporary. Every feeling, every circumstance, every relationship, every moment of joy or pain, and letting this recognition free you rather than frighten you. When you hold life lightly, you can actually experience it more fully, because you're not tensed up trying to make good moments last forever or push difficult moments away before they've even fully arrived. You're just present with what is, as it is, for as long as it is. Think about holding water in your cupped hands. If you squeeze your hands tight, trying to hold on to every drop, the water just runs through your fingers faster. But if you hold your hands gently, openly, the water rests there peacefully until it naturally evaporates or spills. That's the difference between attachment and non-attachment. Both involve engaging with life, with experiences, with people you love. But one is characterized by desperate grasping, and the other by gentle presence. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds beautiful in theory, but how does it actually work in daily life when you're overwhelmed and everything feels like too much? It starts with the smallest recognition. The next time you feel that familiar emptiness rising, that sense that something is missing and you need to do something about it right now, pause. Just for a moment. Instead of immediately reaching for the phone or making the plan or starting the search for whatever will fill the gap, just pause and feel the emptiness itself. Notice what it actually feels like in your body. Where do you sense it? Is it in your chest, your stomach, your throat? What's the quality of the sensation? Is it sharp or dull, moving or static, hot or cold? This isn't about analyzing it or figuring it out. It's just about being with it for a few breaths without immediately trying to make it go away. What you're doing in this pause is training yourself in a radically different relationship to discomfort. Instead of treating every uncomfortable feeling as an emergency that needs an immediate solution, you're discovering that you can feel something difficult without it destroying you. And in that discovery, something loosens. The urgency decreases. The sense that you absolutely must have something right now to feel okay starts to soften. You realize you're actually okay right now, in this moment, even with the discomfort present. This doesn't mean you never take action to improve your life or meet your needs. It means your actions come from a place of clarity rather than desperate avoidance. You choose things because they genuinely serve your well-being, not because you're running from what you don't want to feel. Over time, with practice, you start to notice the pattern everywhere. You notice when you're about to buy something not because you need it, but because purchasing briefly eases anxiety. You notice when you're scrolling not from genuine interest, but from the inability to be still with yourself. You notice when you're seeking another person's validation not from love but from the belief that you're not enough on your own. And in the noticing, you have choice. You can still do those things if you want, but you're no longer compelled by the unexamined pattern. This is what freedom actually looks like. Not the freedom to have everything you want, but the freedom to not be driven by endless wanting. The ancient teachers understood something profound about human nature. They saw that we suffer not because we can't get what we want, but because wanting itself becomes a prison. The endless cycle of desire and temporary satisfaction and renewed desire keeps us perpetually reaching for the next thing, never arriving, never resting. But they also saw the way out. Stop adding more. Start letting go. Empty the cup so you can finally see what was there all along beneath everything you piled on top. Your completeness, your natural peace, your inherent capacity for presence and clarity and joy that doesn't depend on external circumstances arranging themselves perfectly. This teaching doesn't ask you to become something you're not. It invites you to stop pretending to be something you're not. To stop performing the exhausting role of someone who needs fixing, who needs more, who needs anything beyond what already exists in this moment. It's the gentlest teaching, and also the most challenging, because it requires you to let go of the very strategies you've used your entire life to feel safe and worthy and enough. But here's what makes it worth the discomfort. Those strategies weren't working anyway. If they were working, you wouldn't be here listening to these words. You wouldn't be seeking something different. You'd be satisfied with the cycle of consume, feel better briefly, need more, consume again. The fact that you're here means some part of you already knows there's another way. Some part of you is ready to stop filling the cup and start emptying it instead. And that readiness, that willingness to consider that less might actually be more, that's not the beginning of the path. That's already the path itself. You're not preparing to start. You've already begun. There's a teaching in Buddhism called right effort, and it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of the path. When people hear effort, they often imagine force, struggle, pushing yourself beyond your limits with gritted teeth and iron will. But that's not what the Buddha taught at all. Right effort is part of the Eightfold Path, and like everything the Buddha taught, it follows the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose, not punishing yourself into practice, but not letting yourself drift away from what serves your well-being either. Think of tuning a stringed instrument. If the string is too tight, it snaps. If it's too loose, it produces no music. The art is finding that perfect tension where sound becomes possible. This is how we need to approach practice in our lives, with enough structure to create consistency, but with enough gentleness to be sustainable, with enough commitment to keep showing up, but with enough compassion to forgive ourselves when we stumble. The modern world has taught us a particular relationship with discipline that needs examining. We've been trained to think that change requires dramatic action, intense willpower, complete transformation overnight. We see this everywhere: extreme diets, aggressive workout programs, radical life overhauls that promise to fix everything if you just commit hard enough. And what happens? Most people burn out within weeks. They start with enormous enthusiasm, push themselves to unsustainable extremes, and when they inevitably can't maintain that intensity, they collapse back into old patterns, now carrying an additional layer of shame about their perceived failure. The Buddhist approach is radically different. It's about small, consistent actions repeated over time. It's about building something sustainable rather than impressive. 5 minutes. That's all you need to start. 5 minutes a day of intentional practice, sitting quietly, breathing with awareness, bringing your attention back when it wanders. Not an hour of meditation, not a complete life restructure, just 5 minutes. But here's the key. It has to be every day. Not when you feel like it, not when circumstances are perfect, not when you're motivated and inspired. Every single day, whether you want to or not. Because what you're building isn't just the skill of meditation or mindfulness or whatever practice you choose. What you're building is something far more fundamental: the ability to keep a commitment to yourself, even when it's inconvenient. This is where genuine strength develops. Not in the moments when everything aligns and practice feels easy, but in the moments when every part of you wants to skip it, and you show up anyway. The Buddha spoke about right effort having 4 aspects: preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning unwholesome states that have already arisen, cultivating wholesome states that haven't yet arisen, and maintaining wholesome states that are present. In practical terms, this means paying attention to what's happening in your mind and life, and gently steering toward what serves your peace. When you notice you're about to spiral into familiar patterns of anxiety or anger or despair, that's the moment of preventing. You catch it early, before it fully takes hold, and you make a different choice. When you're already caught in those patterns, that's the moment of abandoning. You recognize where you are without judgment, and you find a way to let it go and return to steadiness. When you have a moment of clarity or peace or kindness, that's the moment of cultivating. You notice it, appreciate it, perhaps even deliberately practice it, so it becomes more familiar. And when you're in a good state, that's the moment of maintaining. You don't take it for granted, or immediately move on to the next thing. You rest in it, allowing it to deepen. None of this requires superhuman willpower. It just requires willingness, the willingness to pay attention, to care about your own well-being, to take small actions in service of your peace. Now let's talk about commitment, because this is where many people get stuck. We live in a culture that treats commitment as optional. Everything is flexible. contingent, subject to change if something better comes along. We keep our options open, avoid locking ourselves into anything that might limit future possibilities. And on the surface, this seems like freedom. But what it actually creates is a kind of paralysis where we never fully engage with anything because we're always half looking elsewhere for something more appealing. Real commitment is different. Real commitment means you decide something matters enough that you're going to see it through even when it gets difficult. Especially when it gets difficult. Because here's what commitment acknowledges that casual interest doesn't. Hard times are coming. If you commit to a daily practice, there will be days you don't want to do it. Days you're exhausted. Days you're sick. Days you're traveling. Days when life throws something unexpected your way, and practice feels like the last thing you have energy for. If you commit to a relationship, there will be times of conflict, misunderstanding, disappointment. Times when the easy thing would be to walk away rather than work through difficulty. If you commit to any meaningful path of growth, there will be plateaus where nothing seems to be happening, setbacks that feel like regression, moments where you question whether any of this is worth the effort. Commitment means you know all of this going in. You're not surprised when difficulty arrives. You expected it, and you decided beforehand that when it comes, you won't let it be the reason you quit. This is what makes commitment sacred in the deepest sense. Not because there's anything religious about it, but because it's how we demonstrate to ourselves that something matters more than our moment-to-moment comfort. Think about the commitment inherent in monastic life. Monks don't wake up every morning and decide whether they feel like practicing that day. The structure is already there, holding them even when motivation is absent. The community is there, practicing together even when individual enthusiasm wanes. The routine is there, continuing regardless of personal preference. This isn't about rigid control or forcing yourself into a mold. It's about creating conditions that support your deepest intentions, even when your surface-level desires pull in other directions. You don't need to join a monastery to access this wisdom. You just need to understand that your word to yourself needs to mean something. When you say you're going to practice, practice. When you say something matters, act like it matters. When you commit to showing up for yourself, show up. Not perfectly, not without ever missing a day or making a mistake, but consistently enough that you prove to yourself you can be trusted to follow through on what you say is important. This builds something essential, a kind of internal integrity where your actions and your values align, where you become someone who does what they say they're going to do, not because anyone is watching, but because you've decided that's who you want to be. Now let's bring this into the most practical possible terms. Tomorrow morning. You're going to wake up, and within seconds, your mind is going to start negotiating. It's going to offer very reasonable sounding reasons why you could skip your practice just this once. You didn't sleep well. You have a busy day ahead. You'll do it later when you have more time. You practiced yesterday, so missing today won't matter. You're not feeling well. The conditions aren't quite right. And here's the thing, these reasons aren't necessarily wrong. You might actually be tired, might actually have a demanding day ahead, might actually feel better practicing later. But if you negotiate with this voice every single morning, you're not building discipline. You're building the habit of negotiation. And that negotiating voice will get stronger, more convincing, more skilled at finding reasons to delay or avoid. The practice is simple. When the alarm sounds, you move. Not after thinking about it. Not after weighing the pros and cons. Not after checking your phone to see what the day holds. You just move from lying down to sitting up, from sitting up to standing, from standing to whatever your practice is. You move before the negotiating mind fully wakes up and starts its familiar routine. This isn't about being harsh with yourself. It's about being kind enough to yourself that you don't let the voice of momentary comfort steal your long-term well-being. Because that extra 5 minutes of sleep, it doesn't actually make you more rested. That delay until later rarely comes with more time or energy than you have right now. What actually happens when you move immediately is that the resistance dissolves. You thought it would be hard to practice, but once you're actually doing it, it's fine. Often it's more than fine. It's exactly what you needed. The hardest part is always the gap between lying in bed and beginning. Once you're on the other side of that gap, momentum carries you. This is where discipline becomes your friend rather than your enemy. It removes the daily decision-making burden. You don't have to figure out whether you feel like practicing, because that's not the question anymore. The question is already answered. You practice. The only remaining question is how, and that's much easier to navigate. Over time, something remarkable happens. The practice that once required enormous effort becomes the easiest part of your day. Not because it's suddenly effortless, but because you've built such a strong habit that it requires less and less willpower to maintain. You've created a groove, a well-worn path that your mind and body know how to follow, even when you're tired, stressed, or distracted. The discipline you once had to force becomes the structure that holds you when everything else feels chaotic. And here's the beautiful paradox. This structure, which might seem limiting or rigid from the outside, actually creates freedom. When you don't have to negotiate with yourself every morning about whether to practice, you have more energy for everything else. When you know you can count on yourself to follow through on commitments, you stop carrying the low-grade anxiety of wondering whether you'll actually do what you say matters. When you have a foundation of consistent practice, everything else in your life has a steady base to build from. This is gentle discipline, not the harsh, punishing kind that breaks you down, but the kind, consistent kind that builds you up one small action at a time. It's discipline that comes from love rather than judgment, from caring about your well-being enough to protect it, even from your own momentary resistance. It's showing up for yourself the way you'd show up for someone you deeply love, reliably, patiently, with forgiveness for imperfection, but also with the gentle insistence that some things are non-negotiable because they matter too much. Your peace matters that much. Your practice matters that much. Your commitment to your own growth matters that much. Not because you need to prove anything to anyone, but because you deserve to experience what happens when you consistently show up for what serves your deepest well-being. So start with 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes tomorrow morning, before the negotiating mind wakes up fully. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. Not perfectly, not with rigid intensity, but with gentle, persistent consistency that honors both your commitment and your humanity. This is how transformation actually happens, not through dramatic overhauls, but through small actions repeated so regularly, they become part of who you are. One breath at a time, one morning at a time, one gentle, persistent choice at a time. That's the path. That's all it's ever been. There's a word in Buddhism that holds the key to everything we've been exploring, and yet it's often the most misunderstood teaching of all. The word is equanimity, and in Pali, the language of the earliest Buddhist texts, it's called upekkha. When people first hear about equanimity, they often imagine someone who doesn't feel anything. Someone cold, detached, unmoved by life's beauty or pain. Someone who's achieved peace by shutting themselves off from the fullness of human experience. But that's not equanimity at all. That's numbness. And numbness is just another form of suffering. True equanimity is something far more alive, far more engaged, far more human than detachment could ever be. It's the capacity to feel everything, joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, praise and criticism, while remaining steady at your center. Imagine standing on the shore watching waves roll in. Some waves are gentle, some are powerful, some crash violently against the rocks. The ocean's surface is constantly moving, changing, never still for even a moment. But deep beneath those waves, far below the surface where storms can't reach, there's a place of profound stillness. The water there isn't frozen or dead. It's alive, part of the same ocean, connected to every wave above. But it doesn't get tossed around by surface conditions. That deep water is equanimity, and you have access to it right now, no matter what's happening on the surface of your life. The Buddha taught equanimity as one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 sublime states of consciousness. Along with loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy, equanimity represents the highest development of the human heart. But here's what makes equanimity unique among those 4. It's what allows the other 3 to be sustainable. You can practice loving kindness, but without equanimity, your love might become attachment or possessiveness. You can practice compassion, but without equanimity, you might become overwhelmed by others' suffering and lose your ability to help. You can practice sympathetic joy, but without equanimity, your happiness for others might turn to envy when they have what you lack. Equanimity is what keeps every other practice balanced, grounded, true to its original purpose. It's the foundation everything else rests upon. Now let's talk about what this looks like in the chaos of real life, because ancient teachings don't always translate obviously to modern experience. You receive news that changes everything. Maybe it's wonderful news, or maybe it's devastating. The content doesn't matter for this example. What matters is what happens next. Most of us get swept away immediately. If it's good news, we're elated, making plans, already imagining how this will fix everything that felt broken. If it's bad news, we're spiraling, catastrophizing, feeling like everything is falling apart. We become the wave rather than the ocean. We forget there's anything beyond the surface experience we're having right now. Equanimity doesn't mean you don't feel the emotion of the moment. It means you feel it fully, while also remembering something larger, that this too shall pass. That everything changes. That this moment, however intense, is part of a larger pattern of constant flux. You can feel joy without becoming dependent on it continuing forever. You can feel sorrow without believing it will last eternally. You can experience the fullness of each moment while holding it lightly enough that when it changes, and it will change, you're not shattered by the transition. This is what it means to be unshakable. Not that nothing moves you, but that nothing can knock you off your foundation because you're rooted in something deeper than circumstances. The Buddha taught about 8 worldly winds that constantly blow through every human life. 4 pleasant and 4 unpleasant, always in pairs. Gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain. These 8 winds have been blowing since the beginning of human existence, and they'll continue blowing long after we're gone. They're not personal, they're just the nature of living a human life in a changing world. The untrained mind gets blown around by these winds constantly. You gain something, and you're inflated with pride, already grasping to keep it forever. You lose something and you're deflated with despair, certain nothing good will ever come again. Someone praises you and suddenly you feel worthy, valuable, enough. Someone criticizes you and that worth evaporates, leaving you questioning everything about yourself. You become famous, even just within your small circle, and you start believing you're special, different, above ordinary human concerns. You fall into obscurity and feel like you've lost your very identity. You experience pleasure and chase after it desperately, trying to make it permanent. You experience pain and run from it frantically, willing to do almost anything to make it stop. Back and forth, up and down, tossed around like leaves in a storm. This is exhausting. This is suffering. Equanimity is what happens when you stop letting these winds determine your worth, your peace, your sense of who you are. Let's look specifically at praise and blame, because these two winds probably blow harder in modern life than they ever have before. You post something online, a thought, a photo, a piece of work you're proud of. Within minutes, people are responding. Some love it, shower you with validation, tell you you're amazing. Others criticize it, point out flaws, question your judgment or taste or competence. And if you're not established in equanimity, you ride this roller coaster all day long. Each positive comment lifts you up temporarily. Each negative comment brings you crashing down. Your sense of self, your mood, your peace, all dependent on what strangers on the internet think about something you shared. This is not freedom. This is prison. The practice of equanimity with praise and blame isn't about not caring what anyone thinks. It's about understanding that other people's opinions, whether positive or negative, can't tell you who you actually are. When someone praises you, you can acknowledge their kindness without inflating yourself. You can appreciate their words without needing them to be true or permanent. You can say thank you and let it pass through you rather than clinging to it as evidence of your worth. When someone criticizes you, you can consider whether there's something useful in what they're saying without being destroyed by it. You can discern between criticism that comes from wisdom and criticism that comes from someone else's pain. You can hear it, learn from it if there's something to learn, and let it go if there isn't. But here's what makes this practice so challenging. We're deeply conditioned to use external validation as our measure of worth. From childhood, most of us learn that praise means we're good and criticism means we're bad. We learn to shape ourselves according to what earned approval and avoid what brought disapproval. We learn that our value isn't inherent. It's something we have to earn, prove, maintain through performance. Equanimity asks you to unlearn all of that. It asks you to find your center independent of whether anyone else thinks you're wonderful or terrible. It asks you to know your own worth so deeply that praise can't make you more and blame can't make you less. This doesn't happen overnight. This is practice, sometimes years of practice, of catching yourself in the moment when praise inflates you or blame deflates you, and gently returning to center. What is that center? What are you returning to? You're returning to a simple truth that the Buddha taught, and that every authentic spiritual tradition has recognized in its own language. Your true nature is already complete. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing can be taken from it. All the praise in the world can't make you more than you already are. All the criticism in the world can't diminish what you actually are beneath the surface personality. Think about that for a moment. Really let it sink in. If someone calls you brilliant, have you actually become more intelligent in that moment? If someone calls you worthless, has your inherent dignity actually disappeared? The answer is obviously no. Words are just words. Opinions are just opinions. They describe someone's perception, not your fundamental nature. But we forget this constantly. We take in other people's views of us as if they're objective truth rather than subjective interpretation, filtered through their own history, biases, wounds, and projections. Equanimity is remembering, again and again, that you are not the story anyone tells about you, including the stories you tell about yourself. You are something more fundamental than any description could capture. Something that exists prior to labels, beyond categories, deeper than any role you play or identity you hold. The Buddhist teaching points to this as your Buddha nature, your original face, the awareness that witnesses all experience, but isn't defined by any particular experience. And this isn't abstract philosophy. This has immediate, practical relevance to how you move through each day. When you know yourself as this deeper ground rather than as the surface waves, everything changes. A difficult interaction doesn't devastate you because you know you're more than how someone treated you in that moment. A failure doesn't define you because you understand that outcomes don't determine your value. Success doesn't intoxicate you because you recognize it as temporary and conditional, rather than proof of superiority. You become like a mountain. Rain falls on the mountain remains. Sun shines on the mountain remains. Storms rage around the mountain remains. Seasons change, vegetation grows and dies, climbers come and go, but through it all, the mountain remains essentially itself. This is the unshakable foundation equanimity builds. Not a foundation of stone-cold indifference, but one of deep, living presence that can hold all of life's experiences without being defined by any of them. Now let's talk about how to actually cultivate this quality, because understanding it intellectually and embodying it in the chaos of real life are very different things. The practice begins with noticing when you're being moved by the 8 winds. You receive a compliment, and you feel that familiar inflation, the warmth of being seen as good, smart, talented, worthy. Instead of just riding that feeling unconsciously, you pause and notice it. Ah, this is the wind of praise blowing through. You're not trying to not feel good. You're just recognizing the pattern. External validation arrived, and your sense of self temporarily expanded. You're seeing clearly that your worth feels conditional, dependent on what just happened. The same with criticism. Someone disapproves of something you did or said, and you feel that familiar contraction, the coldness of being seen as wrong, inadequate, not enough. You pause and notice, ah, this is the wind of blame blowing through. Again, you're not trying to not feel hurt. You're just recognizing the pattern. External judgment arrived, and your sense of self temporarily shrank. You're seeing clearly that your peace feels fragile, dependent on others' approval. In the noticing, something shifts. You're no longer completely identified with the reaction. There's a small gap of awareness between the wind blowing and your response to it. That gap is everything. That gap is where freedom lives. Over time, with practice, the gap widens. The winds still blow. They never stop blowing, but you become more and more established in the place that isn't moved by them. You remember more quickly that praise doesn't make you better, and blame doesn't make you worse. You return more readily to the understanding that your fundamental okayness doesn't depend on external conditions. You start to experience something remarkable. You can fully feel the emotion of each moment, while simultaneously resting in something unchanging beneath those emotions. Joy arises, and you feel it completely, but you're not grasping at it, not trying to make it stay forever, not panicking when you sense it fading. Sorrow arises, and you feel it completely, but you're not drowning in it, not believing it will last eternally, not losing sight of the larger context. This is the paradox of equanimity. It makes you more sensitive, not less. When you're not desperately avoiding pain or frantically chasing pleasure, you can actually feel the full spectrum of human experience with much greater clarity and depth. Life becomes richer, more vivid, more textured, because you're not constantly editing your experience through the filter of, I should feel this, but not that. You can be with what is, fully, completely, without the additional layer of resistance that turns pain into suffering. There's a teaching story about a monk who was known for his profound equanimity. People would come to test him, to see if they could disturb his peace. One day, a visitor came and praised the monk extravagantly, calling him the wisest teacher of the age, saying his mere presence was a blessing. The monk listened quietly and said, "Thank you for your kind words." The next day, the same visitor returned and criticized the monk harshly, calling him a fraud, saying his teaching was worthless and misleading people. The monk listened quietly and said, "Thank you for sharing your perspective." A student who witnessed both encounters was confused. "Master, how can you respond the same way to praise and insult? Don't you care what people think?" The monk smiled. Yesterday, he needed to praise someone. Today, he needed to criticize someone. Both had more to do with what was happening in his heart than with any truth about me. Why should I let his need determine my peace? This story points to something essential. Other people's reactions to you are almost always more about them than about you. They're processing their own wounds, projecting their own fears, expressing their own unmet needs. Sometimes their feedback is valuable and accurate. Sometimes it's completely distorted by their own suffering. Your job isn't to be perfect enough that everyone sees you the same way. Your job is to know yourself well enough that you don't depend on their seeing to know who you are. This knowing, this stable sense of your own being that exists independent of external validation, is the unshakable foundation. And the beautiful thing is, once you find this foundation in yourself, you naturally start recognizing it in others too. You stop being so quick to judge, because you understand that everyone is navigating their own version of the 8 winds. You become more compassionate because you see how much suffering comes from not having a stable center. You become more patient because you're not constantly reactive to every little thing that happens. Equanimity ripples outward, affecting not just your inner peace, but your relationships, your work, your entire way of moving through the world. You become someone others can count on to stay steady when things get chaotic. Not because you're suppressing your emotions or pretending everything is fine, but because you've cultivated the capacity to feel everything while remaining grounded in something larger. This is what makes you unshakable. Not the absence of challenge, but the presence of deep stability that holds you steady through whatever comes. And here's the most liberating thing about this teaching. You don't have to earn this stability. You don't have to become perfect or enlightened or somehow better than you are. The stability is already there, has always been there, waiting beneath the surface waves of your life. The practice is simply learning to recognize it, to rest in it, to return to it when you've temporarily forgotten it exists. You are already complete. You are already whole. You are already enough, exactly as you are in this moment. Not because of what you've accomplished or who you've become or how well you're performing, but because your true nature has never been incomplete, has never been inadequate, has never been anything other than fundamentally okay. The 8 winds blow through, and this nature remains unchanged. Circumstances shift, and this nature remains stable. Life brings its full spectrum of experiences, and beneath them all, this nature rests in quiet, unshakable peace. This peace is not far away. It's not something you'll finally achieve after years of perfect practice. It's here, now, in this very moment, closer to you than your own breath. The only thing between you and this peace is the belief that you need to be different than you are to access it. So let that belief go. Rest in what's already here. Be the mountain that watches the weather change without being defined by sunshine or storm. This is equanimity. This is the unshakable foundation. This is your birthright, your nature, your home. And you can return to it any time you remember it's there. Any time at all. There's a weight you've been carrying for so long that you've almost forgotten it's there. It's become part of your normal, this heaviness, so familiar that you've learned to move through life with it pressing against your chest, slowing your steps, coloring everything you see with its particular shade of grey. Maybe it's something that happened years ago that still plays in your mind like a song you can't turn off. Maybe it's a mistake you made that you've never quite forgiven yourself for. Maybe it's something someone did to you that left a mark you can still feel when you're quiet enough to notice. Whatever it is, it's stealing your present. Because here's what happens when we carry unresolved pain from the past. We're never fully here. Part of us is always back there, reliving what happened, rehashing what we should have done differently, replaying conversations and choices and moments we wish we could change. The Buddha taught something profound about this pattern. He said that pain is inevitable. It's part of being human in a changing world where loss and difficulty come to everyone. But suffering, the ongoing torment that extends far beyond the original pain, that's optional. Suffering is what happens when we can't let go, when we hold on to pain long after the original wound has healed, when we replay our grievances, nurse our regrets, feed our resentments until they become part of our identity. There's a teaching called the parable of the 2 arrows. The Buddha said that when you're struck by an arrow, it hurts. That's the first arrow, and it's unavoidable. But then we shoot ourselves with a second arrow, our reaction to the first arrow, our story about what it means, our resistance to the fact that it happened. The second arrow is often more painful than the first. And unlike the first arrow, which comes from life's inevitable difficulties, the second arrow is one we shoot at ourselves. Let's be specific about what this looks like, because ancient teachings need translation into the texture of real life. Something difficult happened. Maybe someone betrayed your trust. Maybe you made a choice that led to consequences you deeply regret. Maybe circumstances beyond your control took something precious from you. That's the first arrow. It hurt when it happened. The pain was real, valid, appropriate to the situation. But then come the second arrows, one after another. I should have seen it coming. How could I have been so stupid? I'll never trust anyone again. This proves I'm fundamentally flawed. They should have known better. I can't believe they did that to me. Things will never be okay again. I don't deserve good things after what I did. Each of these thoughts is another arrow. Each judgment, each rumination, each replay of the painful event, more arrows, shooting yourself over and over with the memory of something that already happened and cannot be changed. And here's the devastating truth. The person or situation that caused the original pain might be long gone. They've moved on, maybe they're not even thinking about what happened anymore. But you're still there, still shooting arrows, still bleeding from wounds you're keeping fresh through constant reopening. This is what keeps you suffering. Not what happened, but what you're doing with what happened. Now, before we go further, something needs to be said clearly. This teaching is not about pretending pain didn't hurt. It's not about spiritual bypassing or forcing yourself to get over it before you're ready. It's not about minimizing harm or excusing bad behavior or convincing yourself that something terrible was actually fine. Pain deserves acknowledgement. Grief deserves space. Anger at injustice is sometimes the appropriate response. But there comes a point, and only you can know when that point arrives, where continuing to hold on to pain stops being about honoring what happened and starts being about something else. It becomes about identity. I am the person this happened to. It becomes about righteousness. I have the right to stay angry. It becomes about protection. If I let this go, I'm vulnerable to being hurt again. And sometimes, though this is hard to admit, it becomes about not having to move forward. Because as long as you're still processing what happened, you don't have to face what comes next. The Buddha's insight was that everyone, absolutely everyone who has ever lived, carries some version of this weight. 8 billion people currently alive on this planet, and every single one of them has experienced pain they wish hadn't happened. Every single one of them has regrets, disappointments, moments they wish they could redo. Every single one of them has been hurt by someone and has hurt someone else, whether intentionally or not. You are not unique in your suffering. You are not specially broken or particularly damaged. You are human, and this is part of what being human means. Understanding this, really taking it in, changes something. Your pain stops being evidence that something is wrong with you specifically and becomes evidence that you're part of the human experience generally. This doesn't make the pain less real, but it makes it less isolating less like a personal failure and more like a universal challenge that everyone navigates in their own way. Now let's talk about the two most common forms of weight people carry: the weight of self-blame and the weight of blame toward others. When you blame yourself, you carry your own judgment like a stone tied around your neck. Every day, you remind yourself of what you did wrong, what you should have known, how you failed to meet your own standards or other people's expectations. The Buddha taught about wise understanding, which includes seeing clearly that mistakes are part of learning. Everyone makes mistakes, especially when they're encountering situations for the first time, without prior experience to guide them. The first time you do something and it goes wrong, that's not a mistake, that's education. That's how learning happens. You try something, it doesn't work out the way you hoped, and now you have information you didn't have before. But we torture ourselves over these first-time errors, as if we should have somehow known better before we had the experience that would teach us. I should have seen that coming, but how? What in your prior experience would have given you that foresight? I should have made a better choice, but with the information you had at the time, with the emotional state you were in, with the pressures you were under, did you actually have access to that better choice in that moment? Hindsight is perfect because it includes information that wasn't available when you actually needed to make the decision. It's easy to see the right path when you're looking backward from the outcome, but in the moment, in the middle of complexity and uncertainty, you did the best you could with what you had. That doesn't mean the outcome was good. It doesn't erase consequences or excuse harm that resulted. But it means that punishing yourself endlessly for not having wisdom you hadn't yet acquired doesn't serve anyone, not you, not the people affected, not the world. What does serve everyone is learning from what happened and making different choices going forward. That's the actual point of difficulty. It's not punishment for being imperfect, it's information for becoming wiser. The Buddhist teaching on this is about self-compassion, though that term can sound soft or indulgent to people who've learned to be hard on themselves as a form of motivation. But self-compassion isn't about letting yourself off the hook or lowering your standards. It's about treating yourself with the same basic kindness you'd offer a friend who was struggling. If a friend came to you in pain about a mistake they'd made, would you tell them they're worthless and should never forgive themselves? Would you say they're fundamentally flawed and don't deserve peace? Would you insist they replay their error endlessly and feel terrible about themselves forever? Of course not. You'd probably acknowledge that they messed up, but you'd also help them see the context, the complexity, the humanity in making errors. You'd encourage them to learn from it and move forward rather than staying stuck in self-punishment. Why do you deserve less kindness than you'd give someone else? The weight of self-blame lifts when you can finally say to yourself what you'd say to a friend: yes, that happened. Yes, there are things I wish I'd done differently, and I'm still a person worthy of compassion, growth, and peace. Now let's talk about the other weight, what you carry when someone else has harmed you. This is often harder to release because it feels like letting them off the hook. It feels like saying what they did was okay when it absolutely was not okay. But here's what needs to be understood clearly. Forgiveness is not about them. Forgiveness is about you. When you hold on to anger and resentment towards someone who hurt you, who is suffering from that? The person who wronged you may have moved on with their life. They did what they did. Maybe they feel bad about it, or maybe they don't. But either way, they're living their life. And you're still sitting here, still angry, still hurt, still replaying what happened, still letting it poison your present moment. They made the mistake, but you're the one still suffering from it. Something about this doesn't add up. The Buddha taught something that sounds impossible at first, that hate never ends hate. That responding to anger with anger just creates more anger. Responding to harm with harm just perpetuates cycles of harm. He said that hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is not a fluffy teaching. This is one of the hardest, most challenging things the Buddha ever said. Because when someone has genuinely hurt you, the last thing you want to hear is that love is the answer. But let's look at what this actually means in practice, because it's not what most people think. It doesn't mean you have to like the person who hurt you. It doesn't mean you maintain relationship with them if that relationship is harmful. It doesn't mean you trust them again, or pretend what happened didn't happen, or let them continue to cause harm. What it means is that you find a way to see their humanity even while clearly seeing their harmful actions. Here's a truth that's difficult to accept. Hurt people hurt people. When someone causes harm, it's almost always because they themselves are in pain, even if that pain is buried so deep they're not conscious of it. Complete, fulfilled, peaceful people don't lash out at others. They don't betray, manipulate, abandon, abuse. Those behaviors come from incompleteness, from wounds, from places in the person that are suffering, even if they'd never name it that way. This doesn't excuse the behavior. Understanding why someone caused harm doesn't make the harm okay, but it changes how you hold it. Instead of carrying the story, "They hurt me because I'm not worthy of good treatment," you can hold the truth. They hurt me because something in them was hurting, and they didn't know how to handle their own pain without spreading it to others. That's not about them anymore. That's about you reclaiming your story from their actions. The practice here is cultivating compassion even for people who've harmed you. Not because they deserve it, we're not talking about deserving. We're talking about what liberates you from carrying their actions like a weight for the rest of your life. There's a Buddhist practice called metta, or loving kindness meditation, that directly addresses this. You start by directing kind wishes toward yourself. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. Then you extend those wishes to people you love easily. Then to neutral people you neither love nor dislike. Then to difficult people. And finally, to all beings everywhere. The difficult people section is where the practice gets challenging, because you're asked to genuinely wish for their peace, their happiness, their freedom from suffering, even if they hurt you. And here's what's remarkable. When you can do this, even a little bit, something inside you loosens. You realize that wishing them peace doesn't diminish your own experience of harm. It doesn't mean what they did was acceptable. It doesn't mean you have to welcome them back into your life. It just means you're choosing to not let their actions define your capacity for compassion. You're choosing to not let their wounds infect your heart with permanent bitterness. This is the hardest path, and it's also the only path that leads to real freedom. Because revenge doesn't heal anything. It might feel satisfying in fantasy, but in practice, it just creates more pain that ripples outward, touching more people, creating more harm that will require more healing. And holding on to resentment doesn't protect you. It doesn't prevent future harm. It just keeps you connected to the person who hurt you through the constant thread of your anger toward them. Every time you think about what they did with rage and resentment, you're giving them space in your mind. Every time you rehearse your grievance, you're keeping them present in your life, even if they're physically absent. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, not the shallow kind that's just words, cuts that thread. It says, "What you did hurt me deeply, and I'm choosing to not carry that hurt anymore. I'm putting it down, not because you deserve my forgiveness, but because I deserve my freedom." This kind of forgiveness is a practice, not a one-time decision. You put the weight down, and tomorrow, your mind might pick it back up again. So you put it down again, and again, as many times as it takes until your hands learn to stay open. Some days you'll feel genuine compassion for the person who hurt you, understanding that they were suffering too. Other days you'll feel the anger rise up fresh, as if it just happened. Both of these are normal. Both are part of the process. What changes over time is how long you stay in the anger before returning to the choice to release it. And gradually, very gradually, the weight lightens. Not because you've forgotten what happened or decided it didn't matter, but because you've stopped using it as a reason to close your heart. The Buddha understood something profound. Nowhere in this world has hate ever ended hate. Think about any situation where responding to harm with more harm has led to genuine peace and resolution. In personal relationships, in communities, in conflicts between groups or nations, has answering violence with violence, betrayal with betrayal, hatred with hatred, ever produced lasting peace? Or does it just create cycles that continue indefinitely until someone finally has the courage to stop, to not retaliate, to choose a different response? Breaking these cycles requires someone to absorb the harm without passing it on, to feel the pain fully without using it as justification to cause pain in return. This is not weakness. This is the strongest thing a human being can do. It takes far more strength to feel hurt and respond with compassion than to feel hurt and respond with retaliation. It takes far more courage to forgive than to nurse grievances. But it's the only path that actually leads to peace. Not just peace between you and the person who hurt you, but peace within yourself. Because here's what happens when you finally let go. You get your life back. All the energy you were spending on staying angry, on replaying what happened, on imagining revenge, or rehearsing speeches you'll never give, that energy becomes available for your actual life. All the space that resentment was taking up in your heart and mind becomes available for joy, for connection, for presence with what's actually here now, rather than what happened then. You wake up one morning and realize you went the whole day without thinking about what they did. And then it's 2 days, then a week. The person who once dominated your thoughts becomes just another human being who crossed your path and is now gone. They don't disappear from your memory. What happened still happened, but it stops being the lens through which you see everything else. It becomes one chapter in your story rather than the story itself. And in that release, you discover something profound. You are not what happened to you. You are not defined by the worst thing anyone ever did to you. You are not limited by the worst thing you ever did. You are not your mistakes, or your wounds, or your history of pain. You are the awareness that holds all of those experiences, learns from them, and continues forward. You are the capacity to heal, to grow, to choose differently, to begin again. This is what the path of letting go offers. Not freedom from ever having been hurt, but freedom from being defined by hurt. Not freedom from ever having made mistakes, but freedom from being imprisoned by regret. The weight you've been carrying, you can put it down. Right now, in this moment, you can let your hands open and feel what it's like to not hold on to it anymore. It might feel unfamiliar at first. You've been carrying it so long that the lightness feels strange, almost wrong, like you're forgetting something important. But you're not forgetting. You're remembering what it feels like to live in the present rather than the past. Remembering what it feels like to breathe fully, without the constriction of old pain. This is the teaching. You can carry it, or you can walk freely, but you cannot do both. Every moment you spend holding on to what was is a moment you're not fully available for what is. Every bit of energy you give to resenting the past is energy stolen from creating your future. The Buddha's invitation is simple. Let it go. Let it go with compassion for yourself and compassion for whoever was involved. Let it go, not because you have to, not because someone told you to, but because you deserve the freedom that comes from walking through life with open hands. And if you can't let it all go today, let go of just a little bit. Just enough to breathe a little easier. Just enough to feel a little lighter. Tomorrow you can let go of a little more. And the day after that, a little more still. Not rushing, not forcing, just gently, persistently releasing until one day you realize the weight you carried for so long isn't there anymore. And in its place, space, lightness, the possibility of beginning again. This is the path. This is how healing actually happens. One release at a time, one breath at a time, one choice to put down what you don't need to carry anymore. You are not your wounds. You are the person who survived them and has the courage to heal. And that courage, that willingness to let go even when it's hard, even when part of you wants to hold on, that's what makes you truly unshakable. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because you know how to release hurt when it comes, rather than building a life around it. This is freedom. This is peace. This is what waits on the other side of letting go. There's a quality of mind that the Buddha spoke about more than perhaps anything else, and it has a simple name that carries profound meaning: awareness. In Pali, the language of the earliest Buddhist teachings, the word is sati, often translated as mindfulness or awareness. But these translations don't quite capture the fullness of what the Buddha meant. Sati is not just paying attention. It's a particular quality of attention. Clear, present, non-judgmental noticing of what's actually happening in this moment, rather than what you think should be happening or what you're afraid might happen. It's the difference between living your life and sleepwalking through it. Most of us spend most of our time in a kind of semi-conscious state. We're physically present but mentally somewhere else, replaying yesterday, planning tomorrow, lost in thoughts that have nothing to do with the actual experience we're having right now. You're eating, but not tasting. You're walking, but not feeling your feet touch the ground. You're listening to someone speak, but not really hearing them because you're already formulating what you'll say next. This is not living. This is existing on autopilot, while your actual life passes by unnoticed. The Buddha taught that awareness is the foundation of everything else. Without awareness, you can't see clearly. Without clear seeing, You can't understand what causes suffering. Without understanding, you can't make choices that lead to freedom. So awareness isn't just a pleasant addition to life. It's the essential starting point for any real transformation. Now, awareness begins with noticing what's actually present, rather than living inside your interpretations and stories about what's present. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a direct experience happening. Maybe you're lying down, and there's the sensation of weight against the surface beneath you. Maybe there's sound in the room or outside. Maybe there's a particular quality of light, a temperature, sensations in your body. All of that is direct experience, the raw data of this moment, before your mind turns it into stories and interpretations. But most of the time, we skip right past direct experience and live in the story level. We're not experiencing the moment, we're thinking about the moment, judging it, comparing it to other moments, wishing it were different. The practice of awareness is learning to come back to direct experience, not as a rejection of thought, but as a way of grounding yourself in what's actually real, rather than what you're imagining, or fearing, or hoping. In Zen Buddhism, this is sometimes called just this. Just this breath, just this step, just this sensation, just this sound, just this moment, exactly as it is, without addition or subtraction. It sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's not easy, because your mind has been trained for years, maybe decades, to constantly drift away from direct experience into commentary about experience. So the practice is gentle but persistent, noticing when you've drifted and returning. Noticing again, returning again, 1,000 times a day if necessary. The Buddha spoke about opening and closing, though he used different language. He talked about the fetters that bind us, the knots in the heart that need untangling, the gates that need to be opened. What needs opening is anything that's been shut down, tightened, defended against life. Your body often holds this closing. Tension you've carried so long you don't notice it anymore. Shoulders hunched forward, protecting your heart. Jaw clenched against words you never said. Breath held shallow against feelings you don't want to feel. This physical closing mirrors and reinforces mental closing. When your body is tight and constricted, your mind tends to be rigid and narrow. When your breathing is shallow and restricted, your thinking becomes limited and reactive. So part of cultivating awareness is gently opening what's been closed in the body. Not through force or harsh stretching, but through kind, patient attention to where you're holding tension and gradually inviting it to release. You might notice your shoulders are up near your ears and gently let them drop. You might notice your breath is shallow and consciously take a deeper breath filling your lungs more completely. You might notice you're clenching your jaw and let it soften. Let your teeth separate slightly. These small adjustments might seem insignificant, but they're profound. Each one is you choosing awareness over automaticity, choosing presence over pattern. And as the body opens, as tension releases, the mind naturally becomes more spacious too. Suddenly, you notice things you've been missing. Colors seem brighter, sounds clearer, sensations more vivid. Not because the world changed, but because you're actually present to experience it. Opening the mind means becoming aware of when your perspective has narrowed, when you've gotten locked into one way of seeing a situation. Maybe you've decided someone is a certain way and you only notice evidence that confirms that view, missing everything that contradicts it. Maybe you've convinced yourself that things have to be a particular way, and you can't see the other possibilities that exist. The Buddha taught about right view as part of the Eightfold Path, and right view includes the capacity to see clearly without distortion. This means being willing to question your assumptions, to notice when you're clinging to beliefs that might not be serving you anymore. Opening the mind doesn't mean becoming uncertain about everything. It means developing flexibility, the capacity to hold your views lightly enough that you can adjust them when new understanding arrives. Now let's talk about what awareness reveals when you actually practice it consistently. The first thing you notice is just how much you're not present. How much of your life is happening while you're lost in thought, planning, worrying, remembering, rehearsing conversations that will never happen. This can be disheartening at first. You sit down to practice awareness, and you realize your mind was somewhere else for the last 10 minutes straight. You commit to being present during a meal, and you notice you finished eating without tasting anything because you were scrolling through your phone. But this noticing, even though it might feel like failure, is actually success. Because you can't change what you're not aware of. The noticing is the first step, and it's the most important step. As you continue practicing, you start to notice patterns. You notice that certain situations trigger certain reactions in you, automatically, without any conscious choice involved. Someone says something, and you feel defensive before you've even processed what they said. You encounter a particular challenge, and you feel defeated before you've tried to address it. These automatic reactions are like grooves worn into your mind through repetition. They're patterns that have become so familiar they feel like truth, like just the way you are. But awareness reveals something liberating. They're just patterns, not permanent features of your being. And patterns can be changed. The Buddha spoke about this in terms of conditioning. We're conditioned by our past experiences, our culture, our family, our own repeated thoughts and behaviors. This conditioning creates the lens through which we see everything. But awareness lets you see the lens itself. And once you can see the lens, you're no longer completely bound by it. Here's where the practice becomes truly transformative. You're in a situation that normally triggers anxiety, and you feel the familiar sensation starting to arise. But this time, instead of being swept away by it, you notice it. There's anxiety arising. That simple noticing creates a gap, a space between the trigger and your response. And in that gap, choice becomes possible. You don't have to act on the anxiety. You don't have to believe everything it's telling you. You can feel it fully, while also remembering that it's a temporary state, a passing experience, not ultimate truth. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that awareness is the path to the deathless. Not that you won't physically die, but that you're no longer completely identified with the changing, conditioned patterns of body and mind. There's a quality of awareness that watches everything arise and pass, thoughts, emotions, sensations, circumstances, without being swept away by any of it. This watching awareness is always here, always available, always steady beneath whatever turbulence is happening on the surface. And the more you practice returning to it, the more familiar it becomes. Until one day you realize that no matter what's happening in your life, no matter how chaotic or difficult or unexpected, there's a part of you that remains untouched, clear, peacefully observing it all. This is not detachment in the sense of not caring. This is profound presence, being so fully here that you're not knocked off center by the constant changes of life. Now, the Buddha was very practical about how to develop this awareness. He didn't just say, be more aware, and leave it at that. He gave specific instructions. The most fundamental practice is awareness of breathing. Your breath is always with you, always happening in the present moment, always available as an anchor when your mind drifts away. The practice is simple. Notice when you're breathing in. Notice when you're breathing out. Not controlling the breath, not trying to breathe in any particular way, just noticing what's already happening. When your mind wanders, and it will wander constantly at first, you gently bring attention back to the breath. No judgment, no frustration, just a patient return. This is the training ground for all awareness practice. Because if you can notice when your attention has drifted from something as simple and constant as breathing, you can notice when your attention has drifted from your actual life. The Buddha also taught awareness of the body, of feelings, of mental states, of the patterns and principles that govern experience. Each of these is a different doorway into the same essential practice, being present with what actually is rather than lost in thoughts about what is. And here's what changes when you practice this consistently. Your life becomes your life again. You're not missing it anymore while lost in your head. You're actually here, experiencing your moments as they happen, available for the beauty and difficulty and ordinariness of being alive. Problems don't disappear, but your relationship to them changes. Instead of being overwhelmed by the whole tangled mess, you can see clearly what's actually in front of you right now, and you can address it from presence rather than panic. Awareness doesn't make you superhuman. It makes you fully human, fully here for this one precious life you've been given. So the invitation is simple. Begin noticing. Notice your breath right now. Notice sensations in your body. Notice sounds around you. Notice the quality of your thoughts. Are they peaceful or agitated, clear or confused? Just notice without trying to change anything. Just see what's actually present when you pay attention. That's the practice. That's always been the practice. Simple but profound, easy to understand, but requiring patience to develop. Every moment you return to awareness, you're watering the seeds of presence and clarity. Every moment you notice you've drifted and gently come back, you're strengthening the capacity to be here, rather than lost in thoughts about being here. This is how you open what's been closed. This is how you wake up to your own life. One aware moment at a time, one gentle return at a time. And over time, awareness stops being something you do and becomes something you are. A natural, continuous presence that holds everything, the joyful and the difficult, the wanted and the unwanted, with equal steadiness and care. This is your birthright, this capacity for clear, present awareness. It's not something you need to earn or achieve. It's already here, waiting for you to remember it, to return to it, to let it be the ground you stand on. So return, notice, be here. That's the path. That's always been the path. There's a teaching from the Buddha that often surprises people when they first hear it. One of his closest disciples, Ananda, once said to him, "Venerable Sir, this spiritual friendship is half of the holy life." The Buddha corrected him gently but firmly. "Not so, Ananda. Spiritual friendship is not half of the holy life. It is the whole of the holy life. The whole of it. Not just helpful, not just supportive, but essential to the very core of the path." This teaching challenges the modern myth that spiritual growth is a solitary journey, that real wisdom comes from lone seekers, finding their own way in isolation. The Buddha knew better. He understood that we need each other in ways that go far deeper than casual companionship. In Buddhism, there's a term for these essential relationships, kalyana which means noble friendship or spiritual friendship. These are the people who help you see clearly when your own view has become clouded, Who remind you of what matters when you've forgotten? Who hold you accountable to your own deepest intentions when everything in you wants to give up or turn away? But let's be honest about something. In our current world, we've confused connection with true spiritual friendship. We have thousands of contacts in our phones, hundreds of followers online, constant access to information, and teachers through screens. We can watch Dharma talks from renowned teachers, read ancient texts translated into every language, access meditation apps that guide us through practices the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago. And yet, have you noticed? Many people feel more alone than ever, more disconnected from genuine guidance, more uncertain about their path, more hungry for someone who truly sees them and can offer wisdom born from lived experience rather than borrowed knowledge. Because here's what the Buddha understood that we're slowly relearning. There's a difference between information and transformation. You can read every book about swimming ever written, study the physics of water and the biomechanics of strokes, memorize every technique. But until you actually get in the water with someone who knows how to swim, who can watch you try and point out what you're missing, who can demonstrate in real time what the texts are trying to describe, you won't learn to swim. Spiritual practice is the same. You can accumulate endless information about Buddhism, memorize sutras, understand theory at an intellectual level. But transformation requires something else entirely. It requires someone who has walked the path you're trying to walk. Someone who has faced the obstacles you're facing and found their way through. Someone who can see where you're stuck when you can't see it yourself, and who cares enough to tell you the truth even when it's uncomfortable to hear. The Buddha used the metaphor of a gatekeeper. Teachers are like people who hold the keys to doors you can't open on your own. Not because you're incapable, but because you don't yet know which door you need to walk through, or where to find it, or how to recognize it when you're standing right in front of it. The teacher doesn't do the walking for you. They don't carry you through the door or make the journey on your behalf. What they do is show you where the door is, give you the key, and sometimes stand beside you with steady presence while you gather the courage to step through. This is why the Buddha emphasized Sangha, spiritual community, as one of the three jewels alongside the Buddha and the Dharma. Because you cannot walk this path alone, no matter how strong or intelligent or determined you are. There are moments when you will lose your way, when the practices that were working suddenly don't work anymore, when you're facing something so difficult or confusing that you can't see clearly on your own. In those moments, spiritual friends become your eyes. They can see what you can't see. They can offer perspective when yours has narrowed to a pinpoint. They can remind you of truths you temporarily forgot. But here's what makes a true spiritual friend different from just someone who's nice or supportive. A true spiritual friend will tell you what you need to hear. not just what you want to hear. They won't always comfort you when comfort is actually keeping you stuck. They'll challenge you when challenge is what serves your growth. They love you enough to be honest, even when honesty is difficult. They care more about your actual well-being than about being liked. They're willing to risk your temporary displeasure if it means helping you see something crucial. This kind of relationship is rare, and it can't be built through screens. You can gain inspiration online, yes. You can learn techniques, understand concepts, feel encouraged by teachings that resonate. These things have value, but they're not the same as sitting across from someone who knows you, who has watched you struggle and grow, who can see the patterns you keep repeating because they're looking at you, not at a general audience. The Buddha taught his students face to face. He walked with them, ate with them, observed them in daily life. He could see when someone was ready for a particular teaching and when they needed to mature more first. He could adjust his guidance based on the specific person in front of him, their temperament, their obstacles, their readiness. This is what real transmission looks like. Not just information passing from one mind to another, but a living relationship where wisdom is demonstrated, embodied, shared through presence, as much as through words. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds beautiful, but how do you actually find these spiritual friends? How do you recognize a genuine teacher when you meet one? The Buddha gave clear guidance on this. Don't look for someone who's perfect or who claims to have all the answers. Look for someone who embodies the qualities you're trying to cultivate. Do they have genuine peace, or are they just performing peace while their lives are chaotic? Do they practice what they teach, or just teach what sounds good? Are they honest about their own struggles and limitations, or do they pretend to be beyond human difficulty? Watch how they treat people who can't offer them anything in return. Notice whether they're kind in private moments, not just when there's an audience. See if they take responsibility for their mistakes, or deflect and blame. A genuine teacher will point you toward your own wisdom, not make you dependent on theirs. They'll encourage your questions, not demand blind acceptance. They'll be transparent about what they know and what they don't know. And perhaps most importantly, they'll have walked through darkness themselves. Someone who has never struggled can't really guide you through struggle. Someone who has never doubted can't help you navigate doubt. Someone who has never felt lost can't show you the way home when you've lost your bearings. The best teachers are the ones who have been where you are, who remember what it felt like, who can say, with complete honesty, yes, I know this territory. I've been lost here too, and I found my way through, so I can help you find yours. But spiritual friendship isn't only about finding teachers who are further along the path. It's also about walking alongside peers who are navigating similar terrain. There's something powerful about practicing with others at your same level. You see their struggles and recognize your own. You witness their breakthroughs and feel inspired that change is possible. You support each other through the difficult stretches when motivation wanes and doubt creeps in. The Buddha created Sangha, spiritual community, because he understood that we uplift each other simply by showing up consistently and practicing together. Your commitment strengthens others' commitment. Their presence reminds you to keep going when you want to quit. This is why monasteries and practice centers exist. Not because you have to join them, but because they understand something essential. Having a dedicated place where people gather to practice creates a field of energy that supports everyone who enters it. When everyone around you is meditating, it's easier to meditate. When everyone is maintaining silence, it's easier to be silent. When everyone is working on letting go of reactivity, your own reactivity becomes more apparent and you're more motivated to address it. But even if you never step foot in a monastery, you can create your own Sangha. Find even one other person who takes practice seriously and commit to supporting each other. Meet regularly, practice together, share honestly about your struggles and insights. The Buddha said that spiritual friendship is the whole of the holy life, because he knew that everything else becomes possible when you're not trying to do it alone. Your discipline strengthens when someone is practicing alongside you. Your understanding deepens when you can discuss teachings with someone who's also studying them. Your compassion expands when you're part of a community that values kindness. And perhaps most crucially, you can't see your own blind spots. You can't recognize patterns you're completely identified with. You need other people to reflect back what you can't see in yourself. This is the real gift of spiritual friendship, not just support and encouragement, though those matter, but the mirror that lets you finally see yourself clearly. The loving hand that points out what you're missing. The steady presence that reminds you of your own capacity for wisdom when you've temporarily forgotten. So if you're walking this path feeling alone, know that the Buddha himself said you're not meant to walk it that way. Seek out those who are also seeking. Find teachers who embody what you aspire to become. Build relationships with people who care about truth more than comfort, who will challenge you to grow rather than just validate where you already are. And be that kind of friend to others too. Show up consistently. Be honest even when it's hard. Offer your presence, your practice, your willingness to walk beside someone else on their journey. Because spiritual friendship is reciprocal. You're not just receiving guidance, you're also giving it through your own example, your own commitment, your own willingness to keep showing up even when the path is difficult. The Buddha knew what modern psychology has now confirmed. We become like the people we spend time with. Our habits, our values, our ways of seeing the world are deeply influenced by our closest relationships. So choose carefully who you walk with. Not in a judgmental way, but in a wise way that honors the precious nature of this life and your limited time to walk the path. Surround yourself with people who inspire you to be better, kinder, more aware, more free, and let go of relationships that constantly pull you back into patterns you're trying to release. This isn't about being perfect or only associating with saints. It's about finding people who are genuinely trying, who stumble and get back up, who care about growth, even when growth is uncomfortable. These are the friends who will walk with you all the way home. Not because the path is easy, but because traveling together makes even the difficult stretches bearable. The Buddha's final words before he died were about this. He told his students, "Be a lamp unto yourself. Find your own light, your own wisdom, your own way." But he also created Sangha, emphasized spiritual friendship, and spent his life in community with others who were also seeking freedom. Both are true. You must find your own light, and you need others to help you see it when you've temporarily lost sight of it yourself. This is the gift of spiritual friendship, being seen, being supported, being challenged, being loved enough that others want your freedom as much as you want it yourself. You don't have to walk alone. You were never meant to. There's a teaching in Buddhism that asks something almost impossible of us. To develop compassion not just for people we love, not just for those who are suffering innocently, but for everyone, including those who cause harm. This is where many people want to turn away from the Dharma, because it's one thing to feel compassion for a hungry child or a sick friend. It's another thing entirely to feel compassion for someone who has caused real damage in the world, who has hurt people deliberately, who shows no remorse for their actions. But the Buddha wasn't asking us to do this because it makes us better people or earns us spiritual points. He was teaching about what actually breaks cycles of suffering. Here's what the Buddha saw clearly. All harmful behavior comes from suffering. A person who is genuinely at peace, who feels complete, who has resolved their own inner turmoil, that person doesn't lash out at others. They don't manipulate, betray, abuse, or intentionally cause pain. Those behaviors arise from inner wounds that haven't healed, from pain that hasn't been processed, from needs that haven't been met in healthy ways. When someone causes harm, they're acting from their own incompleteness, their own confusion, their own unresolved suffering. They may not recognize it as suffering. They might call it anger, or entitlement, or justified revenge. But beneath whatever label they use, there's pain driving the harmful action. Understanding this doesn't make their actions acceptable. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences or boundaries. It doesn't mean you have to maintain relationship with someone who's harmful. but it changes how you hold the harm in your own heart. Instead of the story, "They hurt me because I deserved it," or "They hurt me because they're evil," you can hold the truth. They hurt me because they were hurting, and hurt people hurt people. This shift is profound, because suddenly their action isn't about your worth anymore. It's about their capacity in that moment, which was limited by their own suffering. The Buddha taught that when we really understand suffering, not just intellectually, but in our bones, compassion arises naturally. You see someone causing harm, and instead of only seeing the harm, you also see the suffering that must exist within them to produce that behavior. You see that they're trapped in patterns they may not even recognize, repeating cycles they don't know how to break. And in that seeing, something softens. Not softness that says the behavior is okay, but softness that recognizes shared humanity. You've suffered too. You know what it's like to be in pain. You know what it's like to act from that pain in ways you later regret. Maybe your harmful actions were smaller in scale, but the mechanism is the same. Suffering that hasn't been transformed gets passed on to others. This is why the Buddha emphasized compassion so strongly. Not as a nice feeling to cultivate when it's convenient, but as the actual path to freedom. Because here's what compassion does. It breaks the chain of reactivity. When someone harms you and you respond with hatred, you've just created more suffering in the world. That hatred doesn't stay contained within you. It leaks out in how you treat others, in the energy you bring to every interaction, in the bitterness that colors your view of life. But when you can meet harm with compassion, feeling the pain fully, while also understanding its source, you've stopped the spread. You've absorbed the harm without passing it on. You've transformed suffering rather than multiplying it. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that hatred never ceases by hatred. Only love heals hate. It's not a moral prescription about how you should feel. It's a practical observation about what actually works to break cycles of harm. Now, let's be clear about what compassion for harmful people actually looks like in practice. It doesn't mean you trust them again if they haven't demonstrated change. It doesn't mean you stay in relationship with someone who continues to cause harm. It doesn't mean you don't set firm boundaries or advocate for consequences. Compassion can coexist with boundaries. You can wish for someone's healing while also protecting yourself and others from their current behavior. You can say, "I see that you're suffering, and I also see that you're causing harm from that suffering, and I need to create distance until you do the work to address what's driving your harmful actions." That's compassionate, because real compassion isn't about being nice or making everyone feel comfortable. It's about responding to suffering in ways that actually reduce suffering rather than enabling it to continue. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for someone who's causing harm is to not absorb it, to not pretend it's okay, to create consequences that might finally wake them up to the impact of their actions. The Buddhist practice of metta, loving kindness, trains this capacity systematically. You start where it's easiest, extending goodwill toward yourself and people you love naturally. Then you practice with neutral people, those you neither love nor dislike. Then you move to difficult people, those who've caused harm or whom you simply find challenging. And finally, you extend loving kindness to all beings everywhere, without exception. The traditional phrases are simple. May you be peaceful. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering. When you practice this with someone who harmed you, something remarkable happens. You realize that wishing for their peace doesn't diminish your own pain. Wishing for their freedom from suffering doesn't excuse their actions. It just means you're choosing to not let their harm close your heart permanently. This practice is difficult. Sometimes it feels impossible. You say the words, "May you be peaceful," to someone who hurt you, and everything in you rebels against it. But that's okay. The practice isn't about feeling warmth and tenderness toward everyone immediately. It's about gradually training your mind to see suffering where you once only saw malice, to recognize shared humanity where you once only saw an enemy. Over time, with patient practice, the heart becomes more spacious. Not naive, not foolish, but spacious enough to hold both the reality of harm and the understanding of what produces harm. The Buddha taught this for a reason. He knew that as long as we divide the world into good people and bad people, deserving and undeserving, us and them, we'll stay trapped in cycles of suffering. But when we can see that everyone, absolutely everyone, is doing the best they can with their current level of understanding and capacity, something shifts. Some people's best is kind and wise. Other people's best is harmful and destructive because they're operating from such deep pain and confusion. But it's still their best in that moment, with that level of awareness. This doesn't mean you accept harm. It means you understand it differently. And that understanding creates space for a response that doesn't just perpetuate more suffering. Compassion is the path because it's the only thing that actually transforms suffering at its root. You can fight against suffering, resist it, try to destroy the people who cause it. But that approach just creates more of what you're fighting against. Or you can meet suffering with understanding, with the wish for all beings to be free from the conditions that cause them to suffer and cause others to suffer. That second path is harder. It requires more courage, more strength, more willingness to stay open-hearted, even when your heart has been broken. But it's the path the Buddha walked, and it's the path he invited everyone to walk who wants to be truly free. Not free from ever encountering difficulty, but free from responding to difficulty in ways that create more difficulty. Free from the cycles of reactivity that keep suffering alive in the world. So the practice is this: when you encounter harm, feel it fully. Don't minimize it, don't pretend it doesn't hurt. But also don't let it close your heart. Look for the suffering beneath the harm. Try to understand what pain must exist in someone to produce that action. Wish for them to be free from the suffering that's driving their harmful behavior. And at the same time, protect yourself and others. Set boundaries. Advocate for consequences. Don't enable harm to continue. This is the balance: an open heart and wise action. Compassion that's strong, not weak. Love that transforms rather than enables. This is the path the Buddha taught, not because it's easy, but because it's what actually works to reduce suffering in this world. One compassionate heart at a time, one choice to respond differently at a time, one refusal to pass on the harm we've received. This is how cycles finally break. This is how peace becomes possible. Not someday in the distant future, but right now, in how you choose to meet this moment, this person, this difficulty. With compassion, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Before the Buddha became the Buddha, he tried everything. He was born into privilege, surrounded by luxury and comfort, sheltered from anything difficult or unpleasant. But that life felt empty, so he left it all behind to become a wandering ascetic. For 6 years, he practiced extreme self-denial. He ate so little that his body became skeletal, his spine visible through his stomach. He practiced meditation techniques so intense that other monks looked to him as the most dedicated seeker among them. He pushed himself to the very edge of what a human body can endure. And he discovered something crucial. Extreme austerity doesn't lead to liberation any more than extreme indulgence does. Both extremes were just different forms of violence against his own nature. So he made a radical decision. He started eating properly again, taking care of his body, releasing the harsh grip he'd had on himself. The other monks were scandalized, thinking he'd given up on the path. But he hadn't given up. He'd discovered something they hadn't yet understood. The path to freedom lies between the extremes. This became one of the Buddha's most essential teachings, the middle way. Not a lukewarm path, not a compromise that lacks commitment, but a sustainable approach that honors both the aspiration for freedom and the reality of being human. The Buddha used the metaphor of tuning a stringed instrument. If you tighten the string too much, it breaks. If you leave it too loose, it produces no music. The art is finding that perfect tension where sound becomes possible. This is how we need to approach practice, and really, how we need to approach life itself. Most of us swing between extremes without realizing it. We push ourselves too hard, burn out, then collapse into doing nothing. We restrict ourselves severely, then binge. We're either all in or completely checked out, with no sustainable middle ground. The middle way asks something more nuanced of us. It asks us to find the path we can actually walk for the long journey, not just the dramatic gesture we can maintain for a few days or weeks. In meditation practice, this means not forcing your mind into stillness through sheer willpower, but also not letting yourself drift away into endless distraction. You apply gentle, consistent effort, bringing attention back when it wanders, but without harsh judgment when it does. In daily life, this means not neglecting your body's needs in the name of spiritual practice, but also not indulging every craving that arises. You take care of yourself, eating well, resting enough, moving regularly, while also maintaining discipline around what genuinely serves your well-being. The middle way is often misunderstood as being moderate in a bland, uncommitted way. But that's not what the Buddha meant at all. He wasn't teaching mediocrity or half-hearted practice. He was teaching the most effective path to liberation, one that can actually be sustained over a lifetime, rather than just creating another form of suffering through extreme effort. Think about the people you know who've maintained meaningful practices for decades. They're rarely the ones who talk about dramatic spiritual experiences or push themselves to exhaustion. They're usually the ones who show up consistently, who practice steadily without drama, who found a rhythm that works with their actual life rather than against it. This is the wisdom of the middle way: sustainability over intensity. You're not trying to have the most impressive practice. You're trying to have a practice you'll still be doing in 20 years, because transformation happens through steady accumulation, not dramatic breakthroughs that can't be maintained. The middle way also applies to how you meet difficulty. When challenges arise, one extreme is to fight against them with all your force, to resist what's happening, and try to dominate circumstances through sheer willpower. The other extreme is to collapse completely, to give up, and let yourself be swept away by whatever's happening. The middle way is neither fighting nor collapsing. It's meeting difficulty with clear eyes and steady presence, neither denying it's hard, nor being overwhelmed by how hard it is. You acknowledge what's real. Yes, this is difficult, while also staying connected to your capacity to work with difficulty. You don't pretend you're not struggling, but you also don't let struggle become your entire identity. This balanced approach is actually what makes you unshakable. not because you're rigid and forcing yourself to not react, but because you've found the flexible strength that can bend without breaking, that can feel everything without being destroyed by what you feel. The Buddha taught the middle way as part of the Noble Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Notice that word right. In the original Pali, it's sama, which doesn't mean morally correct. It means appropriate, balanced, aligned with reality, rather than distorted by extremes. Right effort, for example, doesn't mean maximum effort or minimal effort. It means the amount of effort that's actually appropriate for this moment, this situation, this stage of the path. Sometimes that's a lot of effort when you're facing something that requires your full engagement. Sometimes it's very little effort when you're exhausted and what you need most is to rest and restore. The wisdom is knowing which is needed when, and having the flexibility to adjust, rather than rigidly applying the same approach to every situation. In finding your own middle way, you have to be honest about your tendencies. Do you naturally push too hard, driving yourself past reasonable limits? Then your middle way practice is learning to ease up, to recognize when enough is enough, to value rest as much as effort. Or do you naturally avoid difficulty, giving up at the first sign of challenge? Then your middle way practice is learning to stay a little longer with what's hard, to discover that you have more capacity than you thought. The middle way is personal. What's balanced for one person might be an extreme for another. You have to find your own sustainable path based on your actual life, your actual capacities, your actual circumstances. But here's what's universal. Extremes don't work for anyone in the long run. Whether you're pushing too hard or not pushing enough, whether you're too tight or too loose, whether you're fighting or fleeing, any extreme position eventually creates suffering. The middle way is the path that reduces suffering because it's aligned with how things actually are, rather than how we think they should be. It honors that you're human, limited, imperfect, works in progress. It creates space for both aspiration and self-compassion, both discipline and kindness, both effort and ease. This is how you become truly unshakable, not through forcing yourself into an impossible ideal, but through finding the balanced approach you can actually maintain when life gets messy, which it always does. The string tuned to just the right tension, not too tight, not too loose, just right for making music. That's the invitation of the middle way. Find your sustainable path. Walk it steadily. Adjust as needed when you notice you've drifted into an extreme. And trust that this balanced approach, practiced consistently over time, will take you further than any dramatic gesture ever could. Because the middle way isn't about arriving at some perfect state. It's about learning to walk through life with grace and steadiness, meeting each moment with appropriate response, rather than reactive extremes. This is the path the Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree. Not through harsh striving, not through giving up, but through finding the balance that allowed true seeing to finally emerge. The same balance is available to you, right here, right now, in how you meet this moment and the next. Not perfectly, just appropriately, just with the wisdom to know when to push and when to ease, when to hold on and when to let go, when to act and when to rest. This is the middle way. This is the path home. We've traveled far together in these hours, exploring ancient teachings that have guided countless seekers toward freedom. But here's what's most important to understand. Everything we've discussed isn't something you need to acquire or achieve. The peace you're seeking already exists within you. The unshakable foundation is already there, has always been there, beneath every storm you've weathered. These teachings aren't giving you something new. They're pointing to what's always been present, waiting for you to remember it, to return to it, to recognize it as your true nature. So begin where you are. You don't need to be perfect or have it all figured out. You don't need to meditate for hours or retreat from the world or become someone you're not. Just start with one breath, one moment of awareness, one small choice to let go of what you don't need to carry. Tomorrow, when you forget, and you will forget, simply begin again. Return to presence, return to kindness, return to the understanding that you are whole, exactly as you are. The path is walked one step at a time, one gentle choice at a time, one return at a time, when you've drifted away. Thank you for being here, for listening, for giving yourself this time to simply be present. May you find the peace you're seeking. May you be free from suffering. May you know your own unshakable nature. And may you walk gently through this life, carrying only what serves your freedom and letting everything else fall away. Rest well. You've done enough for today.